What's up, guys? Doug Polk here, and welcome back to Poker Hands. Today we're going to be taking a look at a heads-up no-limit hand that was played between two players looking to take down WPT Montreal. Our final two players are Patrick Serda and Ema Zajmovic. Let's go ahead and jump into the action.
Right into seven-figure territory for her career. Great milestone for any tournament poker player. How early did you get that in your career, Jonathan?
First year I played, I lost pretty much everything I touched. Then the second year I had an early score for like 320K, but then I had $1 million score shortly after.
There you go. So it's second
2
year.
years of live poker. But the first 3 years I played literally every day of my life on party poker.
Wow.
Every single day. I took
Full
no
circle.
off days.
Interesting spot here for Ema. She does have quite a strong heads-up hand, but not one you're necessarily crazy about. You know, facing a 3-bet. Certainly an argument to continue here.
So this is a spot where if we were playing normal poker, where she raised the cutoff and let's say button 3-bet, you would definitely be folding the king-9. But heads up, you just have to play more hands. And right here, you have to ask, do we have 33% equity? You do, right? A lot of the time. And we're also in position.
Oh, and she is 4-betting here.
So she's using it as a bluff, which I think is also viable. I would be tempted to 4-bet slightly weaker hands, like maybe king 8, king 7. But, you know, king 8, king 9, certainly a fine way to do it.
Well, if she doesn't want to call the king 9, it's effectively the same thing as the king 8, isn't it?
Right. If you're whatever the bottom of your folding range, or the bottom of your calling range / top of your folding range, those are all pretty good hands to use as a bluff. Now, should Patrick stick around?
I mean, I think there's a chance he would shove, to be honest.
He has to put in 2.2 to win what is going to be $8 million.
I don't think he's going to want to call, but...
Pot odds are a fun thing, heads up.
I could see him shoving, to be honest.
I think shoving would be a little bit maniacal. But hey, nothing wrong with being a little bit of a maniac.
He does call. Nice. What do I know?
Blinds start at 100K, 200K, and our players have 14 million for approximately 70 big blinds. Now, I do have a little bit of inside information here. The players have agreed to not limp the button. It doesn't change things too much, particularly at this stack depth, but it is something to note. The great thing about poker is if you and your opponent agree to something, well, you can make up your own goddamn rules as long as you're both willing to play by them, and so neither player can limp the button. Doesn't really change things too much, again, this deep, because you primarily want to be raising into the pot, but it can become more important as you get to shallower stack sizes. Anyway, Ema looks down on the button and sees king 9 offsuit, a slam dunk open, and she does raise to 2.5 big blinds. I think this is a completely fine raise size. You want to do anything between 2.25 and 2.75 as a button open size. Maybe against weak players, you might want to min raise because they might not defend the big blind enough, but this is certainly the standard and probably optimal button open size. Over to Patrick with 7-5 suited. This is a hand that can either call or raise. Now, typically the value of raising or 3-betting here pre-flop tends to be higher because you can take the pot down right there, and if they do call, you have a lot of equity. But if you always 3-bet hands like 7-5 suited, you might end up 3-betting too much, and you open yourself up to some 4-betting. So I like a strategy here of mainly 3-betting and working in some calls as well. Patrick does decide to go ahead and bump it up and makes it 1.6 million. I actually think I'd like a slightly larger size here in the big blind. When you go 1.6, you allow the button some room to 4-bet. If you make this 1.8, they can't really 4-bet you without either giving you extremely good odds to call or committing themselves to the pot. So I like to make it a little awkward for the other player with that slightly larger size. However, this is certainly still fine. A little over 3x is a completely standard-ish type size out of position. Back over to Ema with king 9 offsuit, and here, well, I think you guys know what I'm going to say. That's right, she has all 3 options on the table here. Now, I actually have a pretty in-depth look at this spot because I've put a lot of heads up and analyzed some pretty large samples, and I think that king 9 tends to be a slightly losing 4-bet, a fairly break-even call, and obviously folding is break-even, so I don't really hate anything too much. The reason I kind of like 4-betting, even though I think it'll be slightly negative EV, is that against players that are 3-betting too much with too many suited connectors or suited gap type hands, then all of a sudden it becomes a profitable play, and it is a nice hand to round out your 4-bet range. Remember, when we're bluffing with these 4-bets, we want to pick hands that can't quite call profitably, because if they jam, we don't really care, right? If we're going to fold king 9 anyway, well, if they jam over our 4-bet, sure, we lose the pot. That sucks with a lot of chips, but we don't feel upset that we didn't get to see a flop. I would never want to 4-bet with a hand like 10-9 suited, because if they jam, it is brutal to lose that equity, so instead we would like to call the 3-bet. Anyway, Emma's feeling aggressive, and she's looking to make a move. I like this size here from Ema, 3.8, roughly 1/4 of her stack, so she's not committed to the pot, gives herself an opportunity to bluff if she has a hand like king 9, and this way she can work in hands like aces, kings, queens, ace, king. And now Patrick, when he has a hand like, I'm just going to take a wild guess, let's say 7-5 suited in the big blind, well, he's going to have an awkward spot. He's probably going to have to call because his odds are pretty good, but it's not entirely clear the way that he realizes his equity post-flop, and this could end up costing him a lot in later streets. So I do think when we look back over to Patrick in this situation, I think I do lean towards a call. You do not need that much equity here to make this decision. In order to make this call, Patrick needs about 27-28% equity. He's calling 2.2 million to win a pot of 8 million. So I don't hate either folding or calling. I don't like jam that much though. I know the commentators want to talk about jam. When we do go all in, we'd prefer to use hands that block more of my opponent's value range. A hand like ace queen or king queen can be a much stronger hand to go all in with, because you'll typically have better equity when called, and you're going to end up being called less often. Anyway, Patrick's not done just here yet. He does call, and let's take a flop.
If it's plus EV, it's plus EV, and it probably just is.
Wow.
This is the problem with calling the 7-5 suited, is that inevitably you make some junky pair, and it's pretty good. Notice here, Ema actually has a boatload of equity with just a 9 of spades. The other card doesn't even matter, really.
More than a boatload. She's a favorite, even though
Right.
Serda is technically ahead right now with the 7.
Check.
She's going to check back.
The flop becomes 10-7-6, all spades. A very interesting board. Both players pick up a little something, but nothing to write home about. Patrick does decide to check in the big blind, and now to the small blind, Ema has a decision to make, and ultimately she decides to check this one back. I love this play. If Ema bets and gets jammed on, she's going to have to bet fold, which is terrible when you have a flush draw and a gutter. In fact, she might even have to call because of pot odds. It's not entirely clear. The problem is that even though her odds are good, if her opponent has the ace of spades, she's in a really bad spot because she has to improve to the straight or pairs, and the flush has to brick. So when she does get jammed on and calls, she's going to be in a bad place. If you check this back, you have all kinds of good stuff that can happen. You can hit a straight that's more valuable because not a lot of money has gone into the pot. You can hit a flush that's more valuable because you haven't forced your opponent's range to be stronger on the flop. If you hit a king, obviously you got top pair. And if you do hit a 9, you got a lot of showdown value against some hands that your opponent can have. Ema does decide to go ahead and check this one back, and let's take a turn.
Doesn't want to have to bet fold this flop, flopping all this equity.
Heads up, check him out.
So interesting turn. If Ema bets the turn as a bluff, she probably needs to bet the river, I would presume. It's always a tense spot because you know the pot's already huge. Lots of money could go in the pot. Ema has to be careful because if she makes
Bet of 3 million.
a huge bet, it may result in Patrick only calling when Ema is just crushed. But at the same time, you want him to fold pretty much anything, right? And I mean, Patrick is in a miserable spot. And you know, when you do call that pre-flop 4-bet, you realize you are going to under-realize your equity, meaning that pre-flop you had 38%.
Oh my God.
Fair calls.
He decides to stick around. He can only beat stone bluffs.
The turn's a spicy one, an offsuit ace. The reason this is an interesting card is that both players should have a decent amount of aces in their range pre-flop, but specifically Ema should have a lot of aces. Some of the hands she might want to bluff with are hands like ace with like a low offsuit kicker, maybe a hand like ace 6 through ace deuce, maybe a hand like ace 7, although a lot of those hands might be calling pre-flop as well. Patrick is going to have a lot less aces because a decent chunk of those are just going to jam pre-flop, but he does have some. It's reasonable to play this line with ace queen suited, ace jack suited, ace 10 suited, ace 9 suited. Really any of those suited aces, the stronger ones, make a lot of sense to take this line with. He could even have some of the weak suited aces, but a little bit less likely. You might be more inclined to flat those pre-flop, but it's definitely also possible. This is a turn card where you're going to want to check most, if not your entire range, which Patrick does decide to do here with his middle pair, and once again, the actions on Ema. This is an amazing spot to bluff in Emma's shoes, and it's one of the reasons why we set up these situations with a flop check. Now she can bet and she can represent all kinds of hands. Ace king, ace queen, maybe some kind of ace x bluff that check back into betting the turn. Now the thing about this that does make it a little bit interesting is I don't think Emma's too likely to bet when she has a very weak ace. Let's say she did 4-bet a hand like ace 3. Would she bet here on the turn? Well, maybe, but it's more likely to me she'd check back so she can have a good hand to call on the river. Now, maybe if she had ace 3 with no spade, it's a little more likely that she's going to go ahead and bet here on the turn to deny some equity. But if I have a hand like ace 3 with the 3 of spades, I'm definitely checking the turn, so my opponent might take a stab at it, and if they don't, well, I can get some river value anyway. But hands like ace king, ace queen, ace 6, or ace 7, if she can have those hands as well, those are all going to be hands you definitely want to bet. It's also possible that she flopped a flush and trapped that, so she has a very credible value range of hands that she might want to bet here on the turn. The best bet size is one that will set up a pretty normal sized river jam, so I like a smallish bet, and she does decide to go with 3 million. 3 million might be even a little smaller than I'd like. Maybe 3.5 million might make a little more sense, but all in all, this is a great bet size. The reason is that she can bet 3 million here, and if she wants to bet again on the river, she can jam her stack for 8 million. At that point, the pot will be up to 14 million, so she's betting around something in the vicinity of 35% here on the turn in order to bet something like 60% in the river. I'd like to maybe even those out a bit, but again, don't hate the size at all. We've talked a lot about Emma's line, but what about back over to Patrick now? Things are not so clear what to do with your middle pair. Sure, you might be good now, but what rivers are good for you? What about if the river is, I don't know, a card that doesn't pair the board or isn't a 7 or 5? That might not be entirely true. There are some low bricks that aren't too bad, but let's just think about this. A king, a queen, a jack, a 9, an 8, a spade. These are all cards that are very dangerous to deal with in Patrick's shoes. However, Patrick does kind of have to make a decision here, because if he calls this turn to fold rivers, what exactly is he hoping happens? You want to call a street to fold the next street when you have a lot of equity. For example, let's say Patrick had 8s with the 8 of spades here. He could definitely call planning on folding the river. But if you do call this turn with a hand like 7-5 suited, you're going to have to be ready to call down on some bricks. Now, Patrick, he's not going anywhere with this $3 million bet, and let's take a river.
3.
Oh my goodness.
Brick City on the river. Does Emma go for it? This could be over right here if Emma goes for it and Patrick decides to be a hero. And I'll tell you, Patrick has hero called Emma once already, and he hero called me yesterday in a huge pot as well. So he is a hero caller, if I've ever seen one. And I mean, we also know Emma loves to bluff. She has an ideal bluffing hand. I mean, it seems rather insane that this would somehow be an all-in pot, but it really could be. Will she go for it? Does this king high have any showdown value at all? And I think the answer is it's close. Griffin, what's going to happen? I'm so nervous.
It's hard because she's trying to figure out what hands he has that would call the turn and maybe fold river. What kind of 10? Yeah.
She does it.
I love it. Oh, I love it so much.
The river is a low brick, and once again, Patrick checks over to Emma. Now, in Emma's shoes, you've sold a pretty credible story. You had the ace in the turn. You had the ace pre-flop. Everything makes sense. And whenever you get to a spot in the river where you've got a very weak hand and your story makes sense, it's usually time to fire. Back over to Patrick. WPT title on the line. A lot of money up top. What does he want to do here with this third pair? Well, it's not exactly an easy decision, but if I had one piece of advice to you guys trying to improve your poker game, if you have a hand that cannot improve much on later streets, and you do decide to call earlier ones, well then sometimes you just gotta put your foot down and see what they've got.
Now, Patrick, the master hero caller. Think there's any world where he finds this call?
I don't know.
Remember, this was a 4-bet pre-flop hand, right?
That's seconds.
Emma raised, Patrick 3-bet, Emma 4-bet.
Oh my god, he's gonna think about it.
I've only seen Patrick use time bank chips a few times, and every time he made the call. He's chatting her up a little bit. He's talking himself into it. Oh, this would be a heck of a call. Could you imagine calling for 300,000 Canadian dollars, the difference between first and second here,
hand
with
is psycho.
pretty much the nut low?
10 seconds. Time used.
Oh my god.
He did it!
Oh my god!
Wow. Just like that. Pair of sevens for all the money. And I think it's done.
I thought this was a pretty cool hand. I really like how Emma played her hand. I think that Patrick's line is somewhat okay. I don't mind just folding the turn, but yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this edition of Poker Hands. Also, if you want to learn how to play a heads up no limit, well, I know a thing or two about that. I did create a course on my site, Upswing Poker, a little over a year and a half ago, so I'll put a link in the description below and check it out if you're interested. Thanks everybody for joining today, and I'll see you again soon.